Why is my family Christian? Jesus Christ came to the world in the 1st century A.D. At this time, the Roman Empire was at its height. After Christ's crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, the apostles came together at Pentecost. At this time, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church was established. The apostles went throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, growing the church. The apostles would appoint bishops in many of the towns they would come to, and those bishops were then over presbyters, priests, and deacons, and other clergymen in their area. The Roman Empire was pagan at the time, and refusal to sacrifice to the pagan idols often meant they would end up facing a horrible death fraught with torment and pain. In 70 A.D., the Roman army conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. The refusal of the Jews to accept the Messiah, Jesus Christ, spurred many violent uprisings by the Jews against the Romans. The Romans, fed up with this, ended up destroying the city and ending the temple sacrifice and many of the liturgical rites which had taken place in the Old Testament times. The New Jerusalem became the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, each church representing the temple throughout the world. The temple being both Christ's body, the church, and where the bloodless sacrifice would continue to take place. The location where the wine and bread is turned mystically into the body and blood of Jesus Christ, purifying our souls and bodies by the divine energies of God. These energies, also being called God's grace, are purifying, illuminating, and divinizing, also called theosis. And so we can become God's by grace. There are also many other sacraments which take place in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. For now it is important to realize only that the apostles appointed bishops. And these bishops went throughout the world, establishing priests, deacons, and other clergymen over the laity of those people in those local areas. After 300 years, the Roman Empire could no longer contain Christianity. Emperor Constantine in the 4th century legalized Christianity, and later on Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire. Our ancestors in Northern Europe were rightfully skeptical about joining this Roman religion. Northern Europeans had been at war with Rome for many centuries. The Goths, which come from Northern Europe and reportedly from Sweden, ended up sacking Rome. Even before this, in places like Teutoburg Forest in Germany, where Northern Europeans wiped out 3 legions of Romans. While Caesar could not subjugate the Northern Europeans, the gospel of the King of all kings could. The bishops who had been appointed by the apostles and the bishops who the bishops elected after them continued to spread north up toward Northern Europe. My family, having come from a long line of Swedish pastors, were ordained by the bishops who were ordained by the bishops who came before them. One of the first saints to reach Denmark in Sweden was named Saint Ansgar. He was the apostle of the north and enlightener of Denmark and Sweden. He was the Archbishop of Hamburg-Bremen. His feast day is celebrated on the date of his repose, February 3rd. Ansgar was born in Amiens. He had for a period resided with the baptized Danish king Harald Klok, and when Louis the Pious at Worms in 829 was requested by 2 representatives from Sweden and the Swedish king Björn at Hague, he appointed Ansgar missionary. The representatives had claimed that the several Swedes were willing to convert to Christianity. Saint Ansgar arrived at Berka in 829 with his aide Friar Whitmar, and a small congregation was formed in 831, which included the king's old steward Hergeir as the most prominent member. The See of Hamburg was designated a mission to bring Christianity to the north, and thus Saint Ansgar became known as the Apostle of the North. He died in 865 in Bremen. His hagiography was written by his successor as Archbishop, Rimbert of Terholt in Vita Ansgari. While St. Ansgar's mission to Sweden bore much fruit, it did not, however, convert the nation from paganism to Christianity. This did not take place until St. Siegfried of Växjö. St. Siegfried was a missionary bishop in Scandinavia during the first half of the 11th century. Originally from England, St. Siegfried is credited in late medieval kingdom studying lists and hagiography, with performing the baptism of the first steadfastly Christian monarch of Sweden, Olaf Skotkonung, in 1008 AD. This single event, more than any other, is one of the main reasons that our family is Christian. At the very least, that we have so many Lutheran pastors in our family. In 1014, Olaf Skotkonung assisted Saint Siegfried in the establishment of the Diocese of Huseby, later Skara. At this time, the diocese was comprised of the Goth lands, Västergotland and Östergotland, East Gothland, some of Småland, and also chunks of the surrounding counties. Siegfried is said to have consecrated a vicar bishop for the eastern half of the diocese in the city of Linköping in Östergotland, and King Canute sent an English bishop named Bernard to fill the see of Scania. By 1028, the English missionary Ulfrid attempted a third re-establishment of Christianity in Uppsala, but was martyred upon anathematizing the pagan god Thor and assaulting his idol in the local thing. The Church of Sweden still accepts the creation of this diocese in Huseby as the creation of the Church of Sweden. It was only 4 decades before what was known as the Great Schism. While we could go into great detail about this, the big takeaway is that the Pope of Rome sent a papal bull of excommunication to the ecumenical patriarch in Constantinople. While this could be considered a schism, for us in the West, the better terminology is to refer to this as its own form of Reformation. For Pope Gregory VII, also known as Hildebrand of Savannah, disregarding the apostolic canons and all of the canons of the ecumenical councils, sought to elevate himself as the supreme pontiff over all of the world. Citing forgeries and claiming powers out of nowhere, he begins excommunicating anyone who does not go along with him in his power grab, as well as using military force to subdue anyone who would oppose him. The main reforms that he brings to the West are the Filioque, enshrining it in doctrine, which it wasn't in the original Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed, which states that I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord and giver of life, who proceeds from the Father. The addition in the West, which was uncanonical and not in the original form, was who proceeds from the Father and the Son, Filioque, in Latin, which is heretical. Rome had been using unleavened bread, or bread without yeast in it, which was not the tradition of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. The bread used for communion must have yeast in it to rise like Christ. There was also the contention that in the West, priests were not supposed to marry according to the Pope. This went against the canons and the tradition of having married priests. Unfortunately, the other bishops in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church were unable to provide new bishops into the lands of the heretical Pope. Thus, the Papal Reformation was complete, and people in these areas had little hope of any change. They would remain Papal Protestants for hundreds of years. The Schism, or Reformation 1.0, had changed the Orthodox faith so significantly that it was obvious in reading the Bible that what the Papal Church was doing was not the Orthodox faith. In the 16th century, or the early 1500s, Martin Luther, along with many other people who had a desire to restore the Orthodox faith, made a valiant attempt to do so. Unfortunately, Reformation 2.0 fared little better. It is at this point where the Church of Sweden, looking at the Protestant Reformation 2.0, decided to take its earlier bishops and then convert them to Lutheranism. And so our Swedish pastors in our family reach back almost to the very Reformation. My great-great-grandmother, Amanda Tellender, has had Lutheran pastors in her family going back 300 years. As I continue to study Orthodoxy, I continue to find that many of the things that have been passed down from generation to generation by our Lutheran pastors, mothers, and Christian faithful match the Orthodox faith. Certainly not all, but most, or many. The bishops over our Northern European ancestors unfortunately have let us down. We have not also held them accountable. We have a real opportunity to return Northern European and European people back to the Orthodox faith of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Join me and the St. Anna Mission as we try to restore what was attempted under Martin Luther and the other reformers, but we, with all of the information we have today and what we know is orthodox, to return to the true faith. Help St. Anna, we will become orthodox. Lutheran Church in America Minnesota Synod, Office of the Bishop, October 25, 1985. Our brother, the Reverend Joseph Emanuel Bergquist, died on Friday, October 25, 1985, at the age of 86 years. The funeral will be on Monday, October 28, 2:00 p.m. at First Lutheran Church, 1114 West Traverse Road, St. Peter, Minnesota. Interment will be at Resurrection Cemetery in St. Peter. Although no visitation has been planned, friends may greet the family after the service. Pastor Bergquist was ordained in 1929 by the Evangelical Lutheran Augustana Synod of North America at Rock Island, Illinois. He served as pastor of Bethesda Lutheran Church in Kenora, Ontario from 1929 to 1930, at Gethsemane Lutheran Church, Plainfield from 1930 to 1936, at Emanuel Lutheran Church in IRWIN, Pennsylvania from 1936 to 1942, as chaplain in the United States Army from 1942 to 1954, as pastor at Andover Lutheran Church in Windom, Kansas from 1946 to 1952, at SWEDE Valley Lutheran Church and Emanuel Lutheran Church in Ogden, Iowa from 1952 to 1963, at Bethel Lutheran Church in KIRON, Iowa from 1963 to 1965 when he retired. He was the interim pastor at Redeemer Congregation in Alden, Minnesota, and served in several vacant congregations including Comfrey, Minnesota, and Estherville, Iowa. He was a member of First Lutheran Church, St. Peter, and had served as the visitation pastor there for nearly 2 years. Pastor Bergquist is survived by his wife, Naim, and 2 children, Diane Francis and Sherry Joe. The home address is 426 West Livermore Street, St. Peter, Minnesota 56082. Herbert W. Chilstrom, Bishop. Minutes. Minnesota Synod LCA 1986-83B. Joseph Emanuel Bergquist was born in Peel, Pennsylvania, January 24, 1899, the youngest of 7 children. His parents were Pastor Per Adolf Bergquist and Amanda Theodora Tellender Bergquist, both of whom were natives of Sweden. He was baptized on February 6, 1899, and confirmed on June 22, 1913, the year after his father's death, by his brother-in-law, Pastor Carl Henry Rask. Through his mother, Joseph was descended from a family of pastors in the Church of Sweden going back 300 years. 2 of his brothers, Adolf and John, as well as a nephew, Carl, also became pastors in the Augustana Lutheran Church. Joseph was graduated from Uppsala College, East Orange, New Jersey, in 1926. During the years prior to finishing his college education, he had also been employed at the Illinois Steel Company and the Ford Motor Company in Chicago. He was graduated from Augustana Theological Seminary, Rock Island, Illinois, in 1929, and was ordained on June 9, 1929, by the Augustana Lutheran Church in Rockford, Illinois, on a call to Bethesda Lutheran Church, Kenora, Ontario. The following year he moved to Gethsemane, Plainfield, New Jersey, where he remained until 1936. Other parishes served were Emanuel, IRWIN, Pennsylvania, 1936 to 1942, Andover, Windom, Kansas, 1946 to 1952, Emanuel and SWEDE Valley, Ogden, Iowa, 1952 to 1963, Bethel, KIRON, Iowa, 1963 to 1965. During World War II, Pastor Bergquist served as a chaplain in the United States Army, 2 years being spent in overseas duty. He attended the chaplain school at Harvard University in 1942 and was assigned to the 515th Medical Clearing Company, later serving as Protestant Port Chaplain in Antwerp, Belgium. At the close of the war, he assisted a group of Norwegians found in a concentration camp to return to Norway. For this he received a letter of thanks from the Bishop of Oslo, Eivind Berggrav. Prior to returning to the United States in 1946, Pastor Bergquist studied some months at the University of Glasgow. In 1929, Pastor Bergquist was married to Alfred Evelyn Lawson of Cranston, Rhode Island, who died in 1941. In 1944, he married Naim Francis Eckberg of Rockford, Illinois. Upon their retirement in 1965, Pastor and Mrs. Bergquist moved to St. Peter, Minnesota. During their retirement years, they traveled widely. Pastor Bergquist also served as interim pastor in Alden and Comfrey, Minnesota, and in Esterville, Iowa, and for almost 2 years he was visitation pastor at First Lutheran Church in St. Peter. Pastor Bergquist died after a lingering illness on October 25, 1985. He is survived by his widow, Naim Bergquist, 2 daughters, Diane Frances Mitchell of Algonquin, Illinois, and Sherry Jo Allen of LeGrand, Iowa, and 6 grandchildren, Timothy, Sonia, Martha, and Paul Mitchell, and Sue and Scott Allen. The funeral service was on October 28th at First Lutheran Church, St. Peter. Pastor Dennis J. Johnson officiated, and the sermon was preached by Bishop Herbert W. Chilstrom. Burial was in Resurrection Cemetery. Joseph Emanuel Bergquist, 1899 to 1985. The Reverend Joseph Emanuel Bergquist was born in Peel, Pennsylvania, January 24, 1899. His father, the Reverend Per Adolf Bergquist, a native of Sweden, was one of the early pastors of the Augustana Lutheran Church. He returned to Sweden to marry Amanda Tollander, who was descended from a family line of pastors which went back 300 years. To this union were born 7 children, of whom Joseph was the youngest. Reverend Bergquist graduated from Uppsala College, East Orange, New Jersey, in 1926, from Augustana Seminary, Rock Island, Illinois, in 1929, and from the Chaplain School at Harvard University in 1942. He attended Glasgow University, Scotland, in 1946. He was ordained at the First Lutheran Church in Rockford, Illinois, in 1929 on a call to Bethesda Lutheran Church in Kenora, Canada. Other churches in which he served were Gethsemane, Plainfield, New Jersey; Emanuel, Irwin, Pennsylvania; Andover, Windom, Kansas; Emanuel in Swede Valley, Ogden, Iowa; and Bethel in KIRON, Iowa. He served as a military chaplain in the United States Army from 1942 to 1946, which included 2 years overseas duty. He was with the 515th Medical Clearing Company, and later became the Protestant Port Chaplain in Antwerp, Belgium. He attained the rank of Major. In 1929 he was married to Alfhild Evelyn Lawson of Cranston, Rhode Island. She died in 1941. In 1944 he married Naim Frances Eckberg of Rockford, Illinois, at the Cemetery Chapel in Rock Island, Illinois. When he retired in December 1965, he and his wife moved to St. Peter and became members of the First Lutheran Church. He continued his work as a pastor by service during pastoral vacancies in Comfrey, Minnesota, Estherville, Iowa, and Alden, Minnesota, and was associate pastor of First Lutheran Church of St. Peter for almost 2 years. He received his 50-year pin as a pastor of the Lutheran Church in America in 1979. He was a member of the Military Chaplains Association, the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post-1220, the American Association of Retired Persons, the Arts and Heritage Council, and the Nicollet County Historical Society. He was interested in all kinds of crafts, especially ceramics, wood carving, and weaving. After a lingering illness, Reverend Bergquist entered the St. Peter Community Hospital and Health Care Center on November 17, 1984, where he passed peacefully away on October 25, 1985. Reverend Bergquist is survived by his wife and 2 daughters, Diane Frances Mitchell of Algonquin, Illinois, and Sherry Jo Allen of LeGrand, Iowa; 6 grandchildren, Timothy, Sonia, Martha, and Paula Mitchell, and Sue and Scott Allen; a nephew, the Reverend Carl Bergquist of Worcester, Massachusetts, and 2 nieces, Ruth Sledo of Auburn, Washington, and Alice Nelson of St. Paul, Minnesota. He was preceded in death by his parents, 2 brothers, both pastors, 4 sisters, and by twin granddaughters. Funeral services were held Monday afternoon, October 28th at 2 p.m. at the First Lutheran Church, with the Reverend Dennis Johnson, pastor of the church, officiating. The sermon was given by Dr. Herbert W. Chilstrom, Bishop of the Minnesota Synod. Carl Erickson was soloist, and Christine Johnson organist. Casket bearers were members of the church council: William Ribasel, Milton Nielsen, John Bungum, Charles Mason, Leslie Peterson, and David Christofferson. Burial was in the Resurrection Cemetery. Oslo Biskup, Oslo, the 8th of August, 1946. Dear Chaplain Bergquist, our common friend Trygve Wheeler of Stavanger, my native city, has told me about you and expressed to me his indebtedness to you and your church for all the help you rendered him physically and spiritually in hard times. So I am happy to have got from him your address to unite my thanks with his. He also brought me a very kind greeting from you, and told me about your church and congregation. May I in this simple way express to you and your church people how we in the Church of Norway are filled with gratitude to your country and people for all you have sacrificed also to the benefit of our freedom. God bless you to live up to the responsibility of all His children in this crisis of mankind. Yours faithfully, Ivan Bergrov.